It's the most unspeakable of crimes.
Cannibalism is so taboo. You can't wrap your head around it.
The idea of consuming human flesh is unbelievable.
People have to take a step back and recognize that human beings can indeed do that.
And for many, cannibalism conjures up the name of one man.
Jeffrey Dahmer personifies every one of our fears. The flesh, the bones, the Polaroids.
It just kept getting worse and worse and worse.
But this carnal act is more common than you think. So where is the line between fantasy?
There are people practicing all of these kinks all the time.
And flesh eater?
He was actively eating human meat.
And what drives those like Dahmer and his bloody brethren to indulge in this ultimate taboo?
He's like a shark that's had a taste of blood. He was never going to stop.
I lived in Milwaukee all my life. Back then, it was called Drug City because of the crime. A lot of drugs, a lot of murders. Drug City had it all.
Looking for a safe home, Vernell and his wife Pamela move into the Oxford Apartments in October 1989.
It was a very nice place to live. They didn't just let anybody move into those apartments, and that was a good thing.
Within a few days, Vernell meets several neighbors, including the tenant across the hall in apartment 213.
I noticed that he was a white guy, which seemed a little bit odd because we were in a predominantly black neighborhood. He seemed very pleasant. He introduced himself as Jeff.
But 6 months into his lease, Vernell starts to notice a foul odor in the apartment building.
I can best describe it as meat rotting in the sun. It had gotten so bad, I went into our linen closet and I grabbed the bath towel and I rolled it up and placed it in the gap between the floor and the door.
Vernell's wife soon traces the stench back to the source, their neighbor Jeff's front door.
She told me that she was sitting in a chair in the hall waiting for him to come home. I felt bad for the white boy for to meet an angry black woman. He said that his meat had soured in his freezer, and I didn't believe he had any reason to lie. Come to find out that that wasn't the deal at all.
Police found a grisly scene. A human head, plus several more skulls and parts of body.
One of the nation's worst mass murder cases ever.
Inside apartment 213.
That's when I met Jeffrey Dahmer. And after that, I never saw Jeff again. Jeff was not real. Jeffrey Dahmer, that was real.
Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment was a series of nightmares. If you opened the door to his bedroom, you would see a dead body decomposing next to the bed. You go into the refrigerator, you open it up, human meat all inside of the refrigerator. You have a severed human skull inside of the freezer and a pot filled with severed penises on the stove. He was actively consuming human flesh.
I remember when he got arrested, I was around 10 years old, and I didn't think that any human could ever do the things that I was hearing Jeffrey Dahmer did. So it really changed my perspective, and I know millions and millions of kids' perspective on what is the boogeyman? What does the boogeyman look like? Now we have to look out for the guy in the khaki pants with the button-down shirt.
I was working for Inside Edition, and the story came in. And my first instinct was to say, I've got to find out about that story. I've got to know who did this and why.
I think what was most remarkable about Dahmer's early life is how unremarkable it was.
Born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1960, Jeffrey Dahmer moves with his family to Bath, Ohio, when he is 8 years old.
Bath, Ohio was a great place, and there wasn't crime, there weren't problems. So I think Jeff had everything available to him that most kids would want growing up, with parents and a brother and a nice home and good schools.
The offspring of a chemist and a stay-at-home mom, Jeffrey and his younger brother David grow up in modest middle-class comfort.
Jeff played in the band, he wrote for the school paper, he was on the tennis team. I think his parents, especially his dad, tried to get him involved with activities and make some friends and not be just on his own all the time.
Still, there are some activities that young Jeff enjoys more than others.
He had an interest in dead bodies of animals. He lived in a wooded area. You'd find inevitably some dead animals there. But he didn't go out hunting. He didn't go out and shoot them.
Once he found a dead dog and he completely skinned the animal. He dissolved the head in acid so we could get all the skin off it. And he took that skull and he stuck it on a pole outside of his shed of collectibles.
You know, there's a lot of kids who are interested in human biology, and to some degree, that's exactly what he was interested in, was animal biology.
He did well in biology classes, and, you know, he had his little chemistry lab at home. I actually thought he might have someday become a medical doctor or something.
Though his father is aware of his new hobby, Jeff finds little guidance within the Dahmer home.
His parents are what you would call emotionally distant.
Jeffrey's mother, Joyce, she had really bad depression, and the only time he would see his father was when he was coming home from work. But even in those family environments, his mother and his father were constantly fighting.
Some children take this lack of attention and they become hams or jokey people looking for validation outside of their home.
One of the things I clearly remember about Jeff Dahmer is that you'd be standing there talking to somebody by your locker, just doing nothing, and he'd just stoop over and put his head on your chest, say, "I want to listen to your heart." One time, he stole the fetal pig in 8th grade biology class.
Dahmer was a little bit of a prankster in high school. He managed to get himself into the honor club photo when he wasn't really in the honor club.
Of course, that's an infamous photo now because his head was blacked out in our yearbooks by the yearbook editor. So when you look at that photo, you see a body but no head. I'd say that at that time, no one really cared. It's just Jeff being goofy, and it's okay. He had good manners and he treated people nice, so he was never suspected as a troublemaker.
But soon, Dahmer's childish behavior makes it difficult for him to fit in.
Jeff Dahmer did have a feeling of alienation because he knew that he was different from other kids. He knew he had different feelings and desires.
He's also starting to realize he's attracted to other men.
When Jeffrey was 13 years old, he had engaged in a romantic physical relationship with a boy in his neighborhood. And this was the first inclination to Jeffrey that he was in fact gay.
In 1976, 77, 78, nobody talked about being gay or sexual feelings. Who could they tell? They couldn't tell their parents. They couldn't tell school counselors.
He wasn't able to express his desire to have sex with men after he hit puberty. He had to shove it down and he had to keep it quiet.
By the time he was 14, he was already crippled with this feeling of otherness. So he would just pound beers or pound alcohol before going into school because it allowed him to kind of feel normal.
Jeffrey's alcoholism starting from such a young age was definitely a warning sign, but no one could possibly predict how much worse things were going to get.
Some people live good lives and become successful and raise families, and other people become Jeff Dahmer and go down a road of no return.
before Jeffrey Dahmer first feasts on human flesh. He's a tortured high school student, hiding his homosexuality.
Jeffrey Dahmer was the loneliest man in the world. He could not explain his inner fantasies to his young friends, and they overwhelmed him every single day.
He really drifted away from all of us. His grades went way down. He lost interest in going to classes. He lost interest in doing most anything, and he was drinking every day.
But it's a seminal event during his senior year of high school that tips Dahmer past the point.
Jeff's parents divorced our senior year, and Mrs. Dahmer moved to Wisconsin with his little brother, and I guess it was some kind of court order to sell the house in the divorce proceedings. And so Jeff's father had to move out of the house too. He moved in the Ohio Motel in Bath and lived there. And then Jeff was living in the house by himself while it was up for sale.
His parents were now gone from the home. The divorce was underway. It provided the opportunity for him to be alone in the family residence.
Dahmer has this profound sense of loneliness and isolation that he's trying to fill, but he doesn't quite know how.
Jeffrey Dahmer, I don't think, ever had a true friend. And that's what he was searching for.
That same year, in the spring of 1978, Dahmer finds a way to fill the void.
Jeffrey Dahmer was obsessed with this jogger. Every day he's been watching this jogger go by.
He had frequently had the fantasy of maybe he could get this jogger to come in and be sexual with him.
But the day Dahmer decides to finally put his plan into action, the jogger never shows. So he sets out in search of a new target.
His desire to have people stay with him, it was just so tangible. He didn't care about who they were as a person. He just cared about their physical form.
He was left to his own devices, and he was drinking heavily, and he saw a young man that was essentially an opening to make his fantasies real.
Stephen Hicks was 19 years old, hitchhiking as many kids did.
Jeffrey Dahmer picked up Stephen Hicks and said that he would offer him a ride, but he offered to go back to Jeffrey's house first to have some drinks, and Stephen accepted it.
Dahmer brought him home. They start to drink. He makes a move on Stephen Hicks, and Stephen Hicks tells him that he isn't gay.
That's all it takes to send Dahmer over the edge.
For Jeffrey Dahmer, with his particular temperament and makeup, he's trying to fill with sex and trying to make intimate connections. But mostly it's about power and control.
He grabbed a barbell and he beat him to death in what he called a moment of passion.
High school senior Jeffrey Dahmer has just crossed the Rubicon, graduating to stone cold killer.
As Mr. Hicks lied dying, Jeffrey Dahmer, strangely enough, wasn't satisfied. He saw the dead body after Hicks had bled out, and he became aroused. And he masturbated on the victim.
The part of him that knew it was wrong and knew there were consequences to his actions was probably scared about what was going to happen to him. But that thrill, that high that he's chasing, is just too irresistible.
Once he realized how aroused he was at the sight of a lifeless corpse, there was no turning back. It is the beginning of a recipe of complete and utter horror.
But Dahmer's depravity doesn't end there.
Dahmer then proceeded to do what he did to countless animals in his shed. He figured out he needed to get rid of this body, and so he dismembered it. Using a paring knife, he removed his arms and his legs, and he separated them into a bunch of different garbage bags.
Jeffrey Dahmer's willingness to manipulate carcasses and play with dead animals can be an early indicator of a psychopath. They are lacking a connection to humanity, a certain empathy. It's definitely a red flag, no doubt about it.
Dahmer's affinity for dead animals is not uncommon among cannibals. This same predilection was adopted by another famous flesh eater. 29-year-old Luca Magnotta.
Luca Magnotta is let's call him an amateur model that uploaded videos of himself murdering cats to Facebook.
Luca Magnotta was all about seeking attention. He wanted all eyes on him at all times.
When you see his first video that he uploaded, he's messing with cats, he's killing cats. It's absolutely horrific. And it goes all the way to him finally killing a human being.
On May 25th, 2011, Magnotta posts an 11-minute video of himself repeatedly stabbing an unknown man with an ice pick. He then uses a knife and fork to remove his victim's flesh and eat it.
It's very much like a drug addiction. I'm gonna do X amount of drugs the first time, but then I'm gonna need to do more and more and more as it goes on.
Luca Magnotta didn't just want to heighten his crimes, he also wanted to heighten his fame, which is something that's unique to serial killers nowadays, especially with the rise of the internet.
That same week, Magnotta ships the remains of his victim to the headquarters of Canada's various political parties.
He's tempting the cops, daring them to catch him. Killers like Luca Magnotta, they go try to get the thrill seeking by wanting to get caught, sometimes even fantasizing about the moment they get caught. Because if you're caught, like, sure, yeah, you're caught for murder and yeah, you might go to jail or be put to death, but man, are you gonna have that spotlight for one glorious 15 minutes of fame?
6 days later, the attention-seeking cannibal gets his wish. After fleeing Canada and triggering a highly publicized worldwide manhunt, Magnotta is arrested in a Berlin internet cafe while surfing for stories about his own media coverage. He's extradited to Canada, stands trial, and is found guilty of murdering the man he ate, his 21-year-old lover, June Lin. Magnotta's currently serving a life sentence. Unlike Luca Magnotta, Jeffrey Dahmer prefers to avoid the spotlight. After killing and dismembering his first victim, Stephen Hicks, Dahmer fears he will be caught.
Dahmer, at this point in his development, is still shy with what he's doing, so he's going to try to get rid of the evidence.
With his victim in several garbage bags, Dahmer sets out to dispose of the remains at the dump. But en route, his worst fear comes true. He's stopped by the police for erratic driving.
They flashed a light into the back of his car and said, "What's in the bags back there?"
Dahmer calmly explains to the officer that he was having trouble sleeping, so he decided to get a jump on his weekly trash duty.
Obviously, Jeff Dahmer was very good at hiding this dark side of himself. He was able to convince people, talk his way out of things, appear relatively normal.
The police give him "aw shucks, you just get out of here. You watch yourself getting home." Jeffrey Dahmer's so freaked out, he drives back to his house with the remains.
This time, Dahmer leaves nothing to chance.
He then dissected it further, pounded the bones into small pieces, and then spread it out over the 1.25 wooded acres of his home.
This wouldn't be the only time Dahmer narrowly escapes being caught in the act.
He's proven to himself that he can do it and get away with it. So how do I find this high again?
Some believe Dahmer's dark desires were biologically predetermined.
You could say that Jeffrey Dahmer's fate was sealed almost at birth. When his mother was pregnant with him, she took 27 pills a day, including growth hormones, estrogen, progesterone, uppers, downers.
Could that trauma while his mother was pregnant with him damaged his brain while he was in utero? It is a possibility.
For now, Dahmer quiets his demons. After graduating from high school in 1978, his struggles become more normal.
The story of Dahmer's after high school life reads like the story of millions and millions of people who are trying to find themselves.
Dahmer attends Ohio State University, but once again struggles to fit in.
He enrolled into college, which he actually did flunk out of after a year because of his alcoholic tendencies. And after that, his father forced him to go into the Army.
He became an Army medic, was dispatched to Germany, but the drinking problems surfaced while he was in the military, and after a period of time, a year or so, he was sent home.
But coming home to Ohio doesn't help either.
There were some problems there at home drinking, and the father thought that Dahmer would be best served by going to live with the grandmother.
In December 1981, Jeffrey moves to Wisconsin to live with 77-year-old Catherine Dahmer.
The hope was that maybe a change of venue would be helpful.
Dahmer seems to take well to his new environment, finding new ways to suppress his feelings of otherness.
The grandmother was a spiritual person, and she seemed to have a beneficial influence on him. Dahmer said he started reading the Bible, started thinking about these things, and assessing what he had done.
Religion was like his last effort on trying to fix what he thought was broken, which was being gay. And he really dove into that and spent a lot of time studying religion, going to church, and everyone around Jeffrey thought that this was going to be a really good thing for him.
Now, 21-year-old Dahmer lives under the radar, doing his best to play the part of a dutiful, church-going grandson. But below the surface, evil is rising.
He continued to push down these darker demons that he held within. But keep in mind, what happens in the darkness comes to light.
In the spring of 1982, Jeffrey Dahmer is living with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, and struggling to keep his dark fantasies at bay. He already has one murder under his belt and is fighting the urge to commit further unspeakable acts. But he has yet to find a taste for human flesh.
He still felt the quote-unquote remorse about Stephen Hicks into his adulthood, and he knew he had to do something because his thoughts weren't going away, the Bible didn't help it, and the booze actually made it worse.
Desperate to act out on his dark desires, Dahmer finds a partner who won't fight back.
So he stole a mannequin from a department store, and he treated it as if it was his boyfriend. He would go out with it, he'd leave it in his car, he'd sleep with it in the bed.
This wasn't some fun senior prank. This was for Dahmer's own sexual purposes.
Pygmalionism is the psychological condition of falling in love with one's own creation. Dahmer has this mannequin as a kind of stopgap measure, somebody he can impose his will on that won't fight back.
Dahmer keeps this new obsession close to the chest, storing the mannequin in his closet whenever he's away. But it's only a matter of time before his dark secret is exposed.
One day, his grandmother went into his room, opened his closet, and was shocked and disturbed at seeing this mannequin. So she completely freaked out and forced him to get rid of it.
Now, Dahmer must find new ways to get his kicks outside the home.
He did a lot of public exposure where he exposed himself to young boys on more than one occasion. He was a public masturbator as well.
He goes to a state fair and he gets arrested for exposing himself.
And then later he exposed himself to 2 boys in a park, and that led to a prosecution.
Still, Dahmer doesn't murder anyone else for now.
Dahmer had great impulse control combined with complete and utter lack of impulse control. Just him trying to present himself as normal. That must have not been easy to do when you're hiding all of these dark thoughts.
To keep his mind busy, Dahmer takes a job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in January 1985.
He was a reliable worker, did good work. He was able to mix hundreds of different mixtures of the cocoa that went into the different orders of chocolate that the company produced.
None of Dahmer's co-workers have any idea of the dangerous sexual fantasies filling his head. But as his desire grows stronger, Dahmer seeks out a new lover in the strangest of places.
One day, he saw the obituary of a man who had passed away in a motorcycle accident. And just by looking at the picture of this man, he completely fell in love with him. So he ended up going to where this body was buried.
He did try to dig up the body. He made an attempt, and dug down maybe a little bit.
It would be bad enough if I were to go and desecrate a grave, dig up a body, vandalize a tombstone. That would be sacrilege and offensive to people. But now we're adding on this other layer of sexuality on top of it.
In the end, the ground is too hard, and Dahmer quickly aborts the effort. But the beast inside of him awakens. Dahmer continues his quest for a submissive lover. He heads to nearby Milwaukee, where he discovers a thriving gay community.
Bar scene was amazing. 2nd Street was the main drag in the 80s. It was very gay friendly. People who didn't care about what other people thought.
Dahmer does his best not to draw attention. Still, he manages to stand out in the crowd.
He would always hang out by the cigarette machine, set back in a little alcove, and he would sit there and watch people. I'm the kind of person, if I see someone standing around countless times, I'm gonna go up and say something to him. And I walked by him just nonchalantly going, "Smile, it's not that bad." And he kind of smiled, and I was like, "What's your name?" "Jeff." And, we talked a little bit. I said, "Yeah, I see you here a lot." I see him looking at somebody. I said, "You like that one, huh?" He'd give a little smile once in a while. I thought he was a very shy person.
Goldie's not the only one to take note of the tall, blonde man in the corner.
A lot of people would like the way Jeffrey looked, and they would talk about him and want to go talk to him. And I always said, "Talk to him." I've talked to him before. He's a nice guy. At least I thought so.
Jeffrey was not someone that would appear to be a threat to anyone. And so when he would approach these men at bars, he didn't seem like someone that anyone should be afraid of. And that really worked in his advantage.
But when Dahmer migrates over to the gay bathhouses nearby, the reception isn't quite as welcoming.
Bathhouses were a place that you could go and anticipate you would meet a sexual partner. But the men there found Jeffrey Dahmer to be incredibly creepy.
So Dahmer finds his own way to gain companionship.
So he'd say, "Here, have a drink of whatever you'd be using." The guy would take the drink and pass out, and Dahmer would then sexually exploit him.
Many of the men that would go to that bathhouse were on the down low. Many of them had families, I am sure of it. So they couldn't tell anybody what happened to them. That's a whole nother level of trauma that Jeffrey Dahmer put upon these men.
But then Dahmer overplays his hand.
A bathhouse operator finds a man unconscious in there, has to summon an ambulance. The guy's taken out to the hospital. They realized he was drugged.
The owners soon traced the victim back to Dahmer.
And they were able to identify Dahmer, said, "That's it, no more in the bathhouse. You can't come in the bathhouse."
But the ban does little to stop Dahmer. He continues to drug men at the bars, then brings them back to nearby hotels to have his way with them.
He can't enjoy himself when the other person is conscious, because they'll say, "You're weird, Jeffrey. Why are you so drunk, Jeffrey?" He wants total control.
Though Dahmer sedates his prey, some cannibals prefer their victims awake.
There are people who actively search out the concept of being consumed, and vice versa. People who are looking for willing dinners.
In 2001, 40-year-old Armin Maivis isn't shy about what he's looking for. He posts a personal ad online for a man he can cannibalize.
His whole thing was he wanted consensual cannibalism. He wanted his victim to agree to allow Armin to eat them.
Incredibly, an engineer from Berlin by the name of Bernd Brandes enthusiastically replies.
They arrived at his home, they got intoxicated, he chopped off his penis, he cooked it, they ate it together. His victim was then saying, "I'm feeling pretty woozy." He then put him in a bathtub and then drained his blood until he was dead.
Over the next 10 months, Maivis continues to take sexual pleasure out of eating Brandes' flesh. In all, he consumes nearly 50 pounds of his victim's body.
It's interesting because the argument there is, was this really murder? It was cannibalism, but was it murder because they both agreed to it?
But when Maives returns to the internet in search of a second victim, authorities are alerted to his crime and arrest the man who will become known as the Rottenberg Cannibal.
The idea of somebody consuming us for food is so far out of our grasp of reality that it just shocks you. People have to take a step back and recognize that human beings can indeed do that.
By November 1987, Dahmer has not yet crossed into the forbidden realm of cannibalism. But with 8 years passing since his first kill, his need to control another living person is escalating.
He meets Stephen Toomey at a bar and goes back with him to the Ambassador Hotel.
Dahmer gave him the drink that rendered him unconscious and then sexually abused him, set upon him sexually.
But just when things are heating up, Dahmer makes a major mistake.
What appears to have happened is that Mr. Dahmer accidentally drank some of this halcyon-laced drink himself.
Dahmer soon passes out. The next morning, he wakes up to find he's covered in blood.
So it was while he was himself intoxicated after 8 years of trying not to kill that he killed again.
The slow process to cannibalism has now been accelerated immensely after the second murder. He is back, and he's more powerful than ever.
Jeffrey Dahmer has spent 8 years trying to convince himself that he will not kill again. Then, in November 1987, he wakes up to a shocking discovery in a Milwaukee hotel room.
Stephen Toomey was dead in that hotel room. He had been beaten to death.
He was black and blue, and Jeffrey realized that in his blackout state, he had murdered Stephen Toomey.
Dahmer claims that he has no memory of it whatsoever. Now, I don't know how much credence to give that because immediately upon discovering this dead body, Jeffrey Dahmer took action.
Dahmer went out and got a large suitcase, brought it back, and packed this young man into the suitcase and summoned a cab. The cab driver came, helped him down with the suitcase, and actually said to him, "What, do you got a dead body in here?"
Dahmer takes the cab to his grandmother's house, where he gets right to work, butchering the body.
Physically, it's very difficult to cut up a body. It's hours and hours of work, and it's messy work, which takes a lot of strength.
But this time, Dahmer doesn't dispose of his entire victim.
He keeps the skull. The skull was significant in Jeffrey Dahmer's progression as a serial murderer.
There have been some serial killers who've actually taken trophies as though this is the fruits of my labor. That really was not what was going on with Mr. Dahmer. This was him trying to hold on and stay close, in his mind, to those whom he had victimized.
He masturbated inside of the skull. He would look at the skull and fantasize about the crime that he committed. Yes, maybe Toomey is dead, but at least he has his skull. And with the skulls come the memories.
It's not long before even this prized possession starts losing its luster for Dahmer.
He's worried about the consequences. So he's going to shatter these bones. He's going to pulverize them.
2 months later, he seeks out another victim, 14-year-old Jamie Dockstader.
Jeffrey approached it with a different angle this time. He said, "Listen, I'll give you $50. Just come back to my apartment with me and let me take your picture." And obviously, as a 14-year-old, Jamie's not thinking worst case scenario.
You're downtown Milwaukee. This white, timid guy come to you, flashing money in your face. Sure, you're gonna go with him, but once he gave them that drink to knock him out, then game is over. Checkmate.
Dahmer follows the same pattern with the teen as his previous 2 victims. He roofies, rapes, and strangles his prey before dismembering him and keeping a memento. Once again, the skull.
Dahmer killed this boy in his grandmother's house. He realized that he could get away with this stuff anywhere.
Dahmer hasn't crossed into the realm of cannibalism just yet. Still, his hunger grows stronger. Dahmer actively begins searching for prey within Milwaukee's gay bars.
There becomes a point of no return. He's like a shark that's had a taste of blood. There really is no going back for Dahmer.
Just 3 months after killing the teen, Dahmer homes in on 22-year-old Richard Guerrero.
Richard was a young man, got in a lot of the bars. I would do shows, he'd come and watch them. We became friends that way. He had that aura about him where, he was a good kid.
Jeffrey Dahmer brought Richard Guerrero back over to his grandma's house. He got him inebriated. He drugged his drink. While he was out of it, Jeffrey Dahmer strangled him to death. But this is where Jeffrey Dahmer starts to take things up to the next level.
Here we have the beginning of a whole new path that Jeffrey Dahmer opened up for himself.
Necrophilia is the desire to have sex with a dead person's corpse. When we start describing having sex with a person's dead body, we are now objectifying a human. A dead person cannot give consent.
Necrophilia is about power and control. If you think your sexual desires are so perverse that nobody would relate to them or understand them, then having sex with a dead body is a way to have that sexual relationship without somebody fighting back or speaking against it.
Jeffrey Dahmer thought, I'll kill someone and I'll feel better. I'll dismember them and I'll feel better. Then he thought that didn't work, so he would have sex with the corpse. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse.
Friends in Milwaukee's gay scene soon noticed Guerrero's absence.
We were wondering what was going on because there was a few people disappearing, but Richard told us he was going to get a job. And a lot of us figured that he's doing good at his job and he's working and helping his parents out. We were all happy for him, but we never realized that he was actually gone.
It's not long before Dahmer returns to his hunting grounds, secretly searching for his next victim. And on April 23, 1988, he finds it in a stranded motorist, Ronald Flowers.
His car wouldn't start. So Jeffrey Dahmer wanted to help him get his car started. So he invited Ronald Flowers back to his grandma's house for some coffee. And what do we know about coffee with Jeffrey Dahmer? It does the opposite of Jeffrey Dahmer's house. It puts you to sleep, right? So he laced it with Halcyon, gave it to him.
But just as his victim's passing out, Dahmer receives an unexpected visitor.
He hears, "Jeffrey, is that you?" His grandmother was still home, and his grandmother was asking what the noise was all about. His grandmother had been home the entire time.
That ended it. He couldn't go ahead to risk the grandmother would ask what happened to that young man, so he didn't kill that guy.
Dahmer waits for Flowers to lose consciousness, then drops his would-be victim off at the county hospital.
In the hospital, Ronald Flowers told the police what happened. They arrested Jeffrey Dahmer, and once again, he talked his way out of it. Ronald Flowers was the only victim who escaped and survived and could have gotten Dahmer arrested if the authorities had believed him.
You find out later on that you survived Jeffrey Dahmer. It's the ultimate nightmare come true. There was a little bit of a trust built. You hope are looking out for each other. And Jeffrey Dahmer manipulated that trust.
The Flowers incident also breaks Dahmer's trust with someone else, his grandmother.
Tensions are escalating. She knows he's bringing guys home. She knows that something smells terrible. But every time she asks him, she doesn't get a straight answer. And on top of that, worst of all, he won't go to church.
He realized that if he was going to keep going the way that he was, he needed to do it in the privacy of his own home. So he ended up moving into his own apartment, living by himself.
Mr. Dahmer's moving out of his grandmother's house and into a place of his own was certainly a setup that was going to enable him to spiral out of control.
It's September 1988, and serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer has already stolen the lives of 4 men. Though he has not eaten any victims yet, when he leaves the confines of his grandmother's home for his own apartment in downtown Milwaukee, he takes his bloodlust to a new level.
Every decision that he made, whether conscious or subconscious, was to at one point give himself the opportunity to fulfill his darkest sexual fantasies.
Just one day after his move, Dahmer once again gives in to his macabre desires when he approaches a 13-year-old boy.
Jeffrey Dahmer lured him to his apartment by saying he would pay him $50 if he would pose for pictures in the nude.
So the two of them ended up going back to Jeffrey's apartment together. Jeffrey made him coffee, tried to make him feel as comfortable as possible.
The teen knows he's in too deep when Dahmer suddenly asks if he can listen to his stomach.
And this boy saw an opportunity to run, and he took it. So he grabs his backpack and he runs out the door.
He gets out, he runs away, he goes to the police. He's obviously in bad shape.
Luckily, this boy remembers where he was with Jeffrey, so he points police into the direction of Jeffrey's apartment. Police go and knock on the door. Jeffrey was there, and he was arrested.
Dahmer was charged by our office with sexual assault on this child, on this 13-year-old boy, and was found guilty by the judge.
It's almost this sigh of relief of like, yes, he's finally been caught. He's finally off of the street.
But it's only Dahmer's first known offense.
He had a very slick, smooth-talking lawyer. He went to trial. The lawyer helped him out.
The judge gave him 1-year work release and 5 years probation. Certainly Dahmer did not unburden himself to any psychologist or social worker about what he had been doing. And whatever examination was conducted did not give rise to belief that he was a serial killer.
But before he starts serving his time, Dahmer's determined to get one more fix.
You think that Jeffrey Dahmer might be scared or chastened by the fact that he was sentenced to a year, but instead, before he goes to prison, he acts again.
After meeting 24-year-old Anthony Sears at a club, Dahmer takes him home and subjects the aspiring model to his usual routine.
He thought Sears was the hottest man he has ever seen. Usually when someone says you're attractive, you take it as a compliment, but if Jeffrey Dahmer says you're attractive, you gotta take it as a threat.
They drank, he kills him, he dismembers him, and he saves some body parts.
But when it comes time to get rid of the body, Dahmer finds it harder to let go.
With the murder of Anthony Sears, that's when necrophilia wasn't enough. So he would keep Anthony Sears' skull and he'd put it in a bag and he'd take it with him to work.
Keeping some of the body parts and carrying them around to work, Dahmer's able to keep it with him as a kind of security blanket. The only thing Dahmer finds satisfaction from is the mutilation and the murder and the rape of his victims. And by keeping a piece of them, he can keep some of that high until he can go back out into the streets to do what he really wants to do.
Dahmer stores the skull inside his work locker. And in May 1989, when he begins his 1-year work release sentence, Dahmer takes comfort having access to the skull every day.
He would go into the locker room at work, and this is completely real. He would open up the bag that held Anthony Sears' head. He would kiss it and make out with it and talk to it. He would put it back in the bag, and then he'd go make chocolate with fresh corpse grime on his lips.
It's interesting. I looked at the mental health records of Mr. Dahmer during the period when he was on probation. They weren't treating him as someone who had necrophilia because he was not able to bring himself to talk about that at the time.
Even the most serious paraphilias can be counseled out of it. I think it's very difficult, but it can be done. If Dahmer said, I want to change, I believe that with professional help, it could have been done, even after he had done a number of slayings. But he has to want to do it. That didn't happen with Dahmer.
Instead, Dahmer lets his thoughts fester, and each new day, his fantasies grow even more frightening. Soon, he crosses an even more twisted threshold, fantasizing about cannibalism.
Somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer wants to have absolute control over their victims. Dahmer realizes if you eat them, they'll always be with you. And that provides a satisfaction and even sometimes a sexual component to the psychopath, that you'll never leave me.
But while Dahmer prefers to dine alone, some cannibals believe it's a meal that's best shared.
Natalia and Dmitry Bakhshevy claimed that they had killed 30 people over the course of 18 years. And not only did they kill them, they kept them in pickled containers in their kitchen. They were seasoning their body parts. At one point, they had decapitated a head and decorated it and served it as a Christmas dinner.
For years, the married couple lives under the radar, feeding their frightening culinary creations to unsuspecting guests.
It was their secret that they had. And this is the difference that we see with them, is typically cannibals tend to be selfish and they like to commit these crimes for their own gratification. But part of Dmitry and Natalia's thing was giving this to other people.
But when they invite 35-year-old neighbor Ilyena Vakrusheva over for a meal, things don't go according to plan.
Natalia had assumed that Ilana was flirting with Dmitry, and she got really angry about it, and she ordered Dmitry to kill Ilana, and he basically followed Natalia's orders.
But just days after killing Ilyena, Dmitry loses his phone. It's found by an unsuspecting Samaritan who stumbles across the grisly photos and immediately turns them over to police. When the phone's eventually traced back to Dmitry, it links he and Natalia to their neighbor's murder, bringing an end to their 18-year reign of terror. Like the Russians, Dahmer's been able to live under the radar for more than a decade. But his taste for human flesh is only beginning. In the spring of 1990, he's released on parole and finally ready to act out on his darkest desires.
He got a cheap as possible apartment. He was in walking distance from his job. Jeffrey Dahmer simplified his life to make it easier for him to be a serial killer.
By 1990, serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer has rented an apartment right inside his preferred kill zone, Milwaukee's Walker Point neighborhood. No one knows Dahmer already has 5 kills under his belt, or that he's beginning to fantasize about cannibalism.
We lived in apartment 214, and Dahmer lived in apartment 213. Jeff seemed to be a lonely person, very alone. Seemed like the only highlight in his life was him going to work at the chocolate factory. He worked 3rd shift, meaning that when he got home from work, I had already left my apartment to go to work.
Jeffrey Dahmer just sounds like a relatively shy Midwestern guy. You can't even think that he would be fantasizing about cutting people up and eating them.
But there are a few signs that something is off with this new neighbor.
Whenever I would want a cigarette and didn't feel like going to the store, I would go and knock on his door, and he invited me in. He always had a lock on his bedroom door. I assumed that he was protecting his TV, things of value, and he had a camera mounted in the corner of his living room.
Vernell doesn't know that cameras have become a big part of Dahmer's grisly fun. 1 week after moving into the Oxford apartments, Dahmer brings home 33-year-old Raymond Smith. Dahmer drugs and kills his unsuspecting victim. But this time, Dahmer's increasingly macabre behavior takes an even darker turn.
He would pose the bodies in intricate, oftentimes very graphic positions and take pictures of them.
Photographs wind up having twofold representation. One, it's a souvenir that I can look at and reminisce later. But two, it is a visual representation of my murder design. After I have had my way with them, I have created them into what I want them to be. I've put them into position, I've killed them, I have submission and control over them.
Everything that he felt on the inside began to manifest itself inside of his tiny Milwaukee apartment. The Polaroids, the flesh, the bones. In some cases, there were just bodies there still. And all of these things really brought home a sexual arousal that he perhaps wasn't getting any longer.
When he's finished, Dahmer saves Smith's skull and places it inside a filing cabinet. Over the next 4 months, he does the same with 2 more victims, his 7th and 8th. Still, he stops short of eating them.
At this point in time, Jeffrey has killed 8 people, and he is still getting away with it. So Jeffrey's ego kept getting boosted after each kill.
Many of these men were reported missing, but because of their color and because of their sexual orientation, police said, oh, okay, thanks. What are we supposed to do about that?
Milwaukee had his growing pains in the 80s. We had a police chief at the time that he didn't get along with the gay community whatsoever.
There was an obvious bias that the police had. They did not look into these crimes as deeply as they should. Well, they should change their lifestyle if they don't want to get murdered.
27-year-old Edward Smith is no exception.
I met Eddie at a house party, and we almost hit it off immediately. He always wore a chic, so we nicknamed him the Chic. There was one time that Eddie saw Jeffrey, and he was like, oh, he's hot. I said, I can introduce you. And unfortunately, I introduced him. When you're out there all the time doing shows and, having fun, you don't really realize how very vulnerable you are. I mean, how can you tell a serial killer? After that, they were hanging around for a good, I would say 3, 4, 5 weeks. And Eddie was with Jeff. And then after that, no one really seen Eddie again.
Eddie's family and friends come looking for him, canvassing the bars where he is known to hang out.
We're like, where's Eddie? Where's Chic? Like, we haven't seen him.
Word on the street is Eddie was last seen with Jeff Dahmer.
Jeff was drunk one night, and we're like, Jeff, where's Eddie? We're looking for him. His sisters are here looking for him. Have you seen Eddie? And he said something real stupid like, yeah, they found him in Racine in 3 pieces.
But Dahmer knows very well where Eddie is.
He removed Eddie's head and tried to dry it out in the oven, and it shattered the skull. And according to Jeffrey, he had never felt so much remorse in his life. And I really do think it's because he had slipped so fully into his fantasy that was Eddie to him.
Dahmer's heartbreak only propels him to find his next victim, and the next. And people are starting to notice.
He is keeping their bodies in his apartment. He is preserving them and they're stacking up. You can only imagine the smell that was coming from Jeffrey's apartment.
Perhaps there was a much darker reason to keep those body parts as well.
By 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer has lost touch with his family and childhood friends.
I mean, we never thought of Jeff Dahmer after high school, hardly. He was out of the picture. He wasn't like a close friend. He wasn't like somebody that you were thinking about all the time at all. At our 10-year class reunion, we were sitting around at a table and talking about people that didn't show up. And Jeff Dahmer's name came up. We're like, yeah, whatever happened to that guy? And somebody at our table said, oh, he's probably a serial killer.
Little do they know, Dahmer's created new friends, a macabre collection of skulls and body parts.
There is some connection between collecting skulls and body parts and cannibalism, wanting that person to be with you forever. And again, wanting that power and that immense desire for control.
And it's with his next victim that Dahmer forever sears his place as the monster in our collective nightmares.
Ernest Miller represented the next step in his depraved behavior, because after he killed him and dismembered him, he cooked him and he ate him.
That's when the cannibalism started. The keeping of the body meat for his consumption was new, and it shows a natural escalation of his crimes. It became a part of his sexual act, where he spent a long time like cooking it and seasoning it. He would eat a chunk of it, and then the act of him doing it would then make him sexually aroused again.
Something like this that is so taboo makes you sit there and go, why did he do this? Like, what drives a person to that point?
There's songs we listen to every day that talk about, like, I could eat you to pieces. We say that to children. And this is so common. There's even a name for it, vorophilia. Vorophilia is the fantasy and the desire to be consumed or to consume others.
But those who truly practice vorophilia know there's one key distinction from cannibalism. It's all fantasy.
Once it crosses that line of fantasy and it actually becomes a place of violence or harm to the folks that are involved, it is no longer vorophilia. Violence against someone else, that is the taboo.
Jeffrey is doing this because he wants to not feel alone anymore. He wants to feel like he has control. He doesn't want to feel rejected. He wants to feel like his victims are going to stay with him forever.
I assumed that he was lonely and was in need of a friend. On one occasion, his apartment door was open and I could see inside, and I saw a tall black guy sitting in Jeff's apartment, and they were drinking beer.
Later that night, Vernell recalls seeing that same man disappear with Dahmer down the hall.
I remember telling my wife, well, hey, he got a friend, you know. But it did turn out that that was one of his victims.
His ninth, 22-year-old David Thomas. This time, Dahmer changes up his routine. He takes Thomas's body and for the first time in years, simply discards it.
It is just so unbelievable to think that somebody in an apartment in Milwaukee would have the gall to murder this many people and throw the human body away like it was rotten meat. It just shows you how inhumane Dahmer was, how little he respected human life, of how often he's been murdering, of how normalized he's made murdering, and just how purposeful he acts.
Dahmer's not the only serial killer to go down this morbid path. Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield, was the king of the macabre back in his Wisconsin hometown.
Ed Gein was a grave-robbing serial killer, and he's the famous inspiration for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho. Of all of the characters that you'd cover in true crime, Ed Gein could be very accurately described as a ghoul. And he was an all-around weird guy.
Driven by loneliness, Gein begins stealing body parts from graves at the age of 41, the first of which belongs to his own mother.
He wore his mother's body, like he dug her up and he turned it into a suit and he wore it for fun.
He finds ways to act out his sexual compulsions for human mutilation and power and control. And he keeps these souvenirs and these body parts and these skins.
But it's not until 10 years later, in November 1957, that the people of Plainsville catch on to his crimes. After the disappearance of a local hardware store owner leads police to Gein, he is arrested, and his 195-acre farm is searched. There, police not only find the headless, gutted corpse of their missing woman, but also the body parts of at least 15 other women that have been fashioned into clothing, furniture, and other pieces of frightening decor.
Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer are both similar in that, because in a way they had a childlike curiosity about the human body. Dahmer made his entire apartment a trophy case. When he went into that home, he could experience every single moment of every murder again and again and again, just sitting on the couch.
By 1990, Dahmer's brazen behavior becomes reckless, and neighbors are getting suspicious.
This one particular evening on a Tuesday, I had gotten in, and as I was entering the building, I heard a hand tool running in Jeff's apartment. I couldn't distinguish if it was a saw or if it was a drill. I said, man, what is he building over there? As I was entering the apartment, coming into the door, I could hear Jeff very clearly stating, "See what you made me do?"
Over the last 3 decades, serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer has left a trail of death and destruction wherever he's gone, and has even started eating his victims. But the disappearances of these men within Milwaukee's gay community don't go unnoticed.
Everyone was speculating because there was a few people disappearing. They were coming from Madison to look for people. I mean, they were in the bars every week, you know, passing out flyers. Cops were nowhere to be found.
And that's what allowed Jeffrey Dahmer to operate in secrecy for so long. Because one thing about the gay scene at the time too was that guys used to kind of disappear all the time. Because guys would have to go to another city to a gay bar so they could be gay in that city and not be seen in their hometown. And so nobody asked these questions about them.
Dahmer continues cruising the clubs, but his behavior's becoming increasingly erratic.
Jeffrey got a little bit too drunk once in a while, and he was asked to leave the bar a couple times.
So Dahmer turns to the streets. There, he propositions 14-year-old Konarak Synthesamphone with money to pose nude. Konarak is the older brother of the boy Dahmer was sentenced to jail for sexually assaulting 3 years ago, making the boys the only members of the same family targeted by the serial killer.
This boy comes back to his apartment. Dahmer takes pictures of him, and he injects him, he rapes him.
This is when the Jeffrey Dahmer story really jumps the shark. Jeffrey Dahmer says to himself, this is just not working for me. I'm not getting what I want. out of this. I'm not feeling any less lonely. As a matter of fact, my apartment stinks. I need to figure out a way to make a permanent partner. He wants someone silent, like a mannequin.
Dahmer comes up with this idea that if he can turn these men into zombies, then he can keep them under his control and they'll stay with him.
What he does next is right out of Frankenstein. He gives Conorak a homemade lobotomy.
You just imagine being these poor victims and you have someone drilling in your skull and then dumping hydrochloric acid in your brain. And the whole point is to make a sex zombie out of you. And it is so beyond. He thought he was actually improving some ways by saying, well, I'm not gonna kill him. I'm just gonna try to make a zombie out of them so we can have sex.
You would think on face value, oh my God, you are a sadist because you are drilling holes into somebody's head, right? But for Dahmer, that's a means to an end. Dahmer wants to create an intimate partner that won't leave and abandon him. Somebody that's a willing, compliant companion that he can have absolute control over. An ultimate submissive.
But Dahmer can't do this work sober. An alcoholic since age 14, he must get drunk to perform his unspeakable acts. So halfway through the process, he decides to step out for some beer.
So Dahmer left the apartment, went to a liquor store several blocks away. This young Asian boy got out onto the street with no clothes on.
I noticed an image from afar, and I thought I was tripping. It was a person that looked completely naked. When I got up close, I was able to tell, it was a male and that he was pretty young. He was falling, he was staggering, he couldn't talk. I'm asking him, like, what happened to you? Are you okay? Like, where are your clothes? And he couldn't say anything. He just kept reaching for me, like a baby. Clearly he got away from somewhere. He was bruised up and he was bleeding and he needed help. So I decided that I would go and dial 911.
He's been beaten up real bad and he fell out and people were trying to help him stand. He can't stand. He's bloody there. He has no clothes on. He is very hurt.
As I was speaking to them, they was asking me questions. Then there was this man who appeared and I didn't know who he was. He just immediately grabbed the boy and was trying to just take him. I actually mentioned that on the 911 call. I said, well, a guy has come up and he's trying to take him. And they said, well, help is on the way. Don't let him take him. I went back. I'm listening to the man talk to the boy and he was saying, pull yourself together. And I said, just call 911, help is on the way. And he was literally trying to drag him. And I'm like, why are you taking him? Like, help is on the way. I'm like, do you know him? And he was like, you need to stay out of this. This has nothing to do with you. We was like doing a tug of war. I just felt like something wasn't right. I just felt like I should let him take him.
But when police arrive, they don't share Cola's concerns.
The 14-year-old victim, he's already had a hole halfway drilled into the top of his head. He was bleeding, screaming. Jeffrey Dahmer, he's like, yeah, he looks young, but this is my 20-year-old boyfriend. We were having some BDSM sex. That's why he's bleeding.
I butted in and I tapped one of the officers. I said, excuse me, I don't think you know him and they was like, and this one officer told me that he had been investigating 8 years and he didn't get an amateur poke into his business. I even saw one of the officers pat Jeffrey Dahmer on his back.
Dahmer brings the cops back to his apartment and shows the officers Polaroid pictures of this 14-year-old boy nude to prove to the officers that they were indeed in a sexual relationship. As Dahmer showed them the Polaroids, He also had a corpse on his bed, rotting.
The cops commented that it smelled like someone took a shit in the living room floor. The cops essentially give the victim back to Jeffrey Dahmer, and then they left. They did not care.
Here you have a young man bleeding from his behind, beat up a little bit, and you're giving him back to his lover who just probably beat him up. I don't get that.
Intoxicated Asian naked male was returned to his sober boyfriend.
You would think any rational officer would say, well, number one, that's child pornography, and number two, you're coming with us. But instead, they said, oh, I guess that proves it. You guys must be lovers. And they simply left.
The Milwaukee Police Department, they weren't looking hard enough because he was gay, and I think the police wanted to stay as far away as they could at that time from the gayness aspect of it.
I'm thinking like, this is crazy. Why they don't want to listen to me? This boy is in trouble. He is with the wrong person. If they would have just did a check, you know, how they run people's name constantly all the time, procedure, they would have noticed like, oh my, this is a pedophile who was on probation because he had molested Conor Sapphone's brother. It's just so many things that didn't happen that should have happened that night.
The way that justice is handed down is oftentimes reflected of the way that we look at marginalized folks. We start to hear the stereotypes, sex workers, Black people, Asian people. They can't be believed. They're dramatic. They're over-exaggerating and uphold the stereotype of a white man. Safe, good, not causing any trouble. I was only trying to help them. You know, it was their idea. I'll take it from here.
So many times, Jeffrey Dahmer was an inch away from being stopped, and yet he never was.
Unchecked, Dahmer continues his quest to transform Conorak into a sex zombie, drilling another hole in the boy's head. But the second attempt simply kills the 14-year-old and further emboldens the killer cannibal.
He was just becoming more and more out of control, more and more disturbed in his thinking. After the police had come into his apartment, you'd think he'd have left that apartment. He still stays there.
He was actively eating people, and it become a habit for him. He had put together meals that were inside of his refrigerator. And then also, like, he made that whole pot of penises. That's real. He did cook up a bunch of severed penises in a pot.
He has no indication of being busted. He doesn't particularly fear law enforcement. Obviously, he just simply goes up to them and talks to them. If you're Dahmer at this point, why would you stop?
This isn't a madman out of control. This isn't a man that doesn't know what he's doing. This is a man that knew it was wrong, knew he had to be under stress, and he performed superbly under stress.
But as the months go by, Dahmer's starting to get sloppy.
Smell in the hallway, it was a smell that you could not ignore it. It was atrocious. The smell was coming from Jeff's apartment. He had been warned about the smell twice.
At one point, he started falling asleep at the chocolate factory, and that was because of his nighttime activities, his nocturnal depravity. He couldn't stay awake, and they fired him for sleeping on the job.
With his world falling apart, Dahmer slips deeper into fantasy.
He had begun taking victims, spray painted skulls, and that was the beginning of what would become a shrine to his victims, of course, for his own sick pleasure. The murder museum Jeffrey Dahmer was creating was just another reminder of how much he demanded control. He never wanted the memories to go away. That's why he has the pictures, he has the skulls.
Think of somebody who's addicted to drugs who, yes, they're chasing the high, yes, they're doing the drugs every day, but on another level, they just want it to all be over. They want it to end. They don't want to keep running on this treadmill anymore.
You almost wonder if at some point, do you want to be caught?
By May of 1991, serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer has murdered at least 17 men and boys over the course of 13 years and eaten several of his victims' body parts. To commemorate his achievement, he builds a horrific shrine.
Jeffrey Dahmer had a ritualistic altar, what he viewed as a throne that he would sit on, like as an emperor of his one-bedroom apartment. He was submerged in his crimes.
A shrine of skulls is almost a museum. It's a way to kind of look back on your career of murder and mayhem and take measure of it and appreciation. And I'm not just looking at one murder and one thing I've done. I'm looking at it in its entirety.
On July 22nd, 1991, Dahmer attempts to add one more skull to his collection.
Dahmer encountered a man named Tracy Edwards. They picked up alcohol, and he took Edwards with himself. They went back to Dahmer's apartment. That was obviously going to be his next victim.
He comes into the apartment. He smells an awful smell, which smells like rotting meat. He's like, something's going on here. He's backing his way out of the house.
But the cannibal is determined to not let him leave. Edwards tries to escape, and the men struggle.
He had the wherewithal to know that trouble was right around the corner, to realize that he was looking at the face of evil, and to do something about it. Edwards knew he had to get out of there as fast as possible.
Then, Edwards sees his chance.
Tracy Edwards was a street-savvy guy and was able to escape. He went down the street. He had a handcuff hanging, and he stopped to a police car.
Edwards tells police a freak was holding him captive.
Before I knew it, he threw a handcuff on me and had a big blade up under my heart, telling me if I don't do what he says, he's gonna kill me, He took his mind and the blade off me for a moment, and then I knew then it was my time to make my move, that if I didn't take my chance then I would never get out this place,
He then leads authorities back to the Oxford apartments.
Dahmer opens the door. They say, "Do you have a key to these handcuffs?" He says, "Yeah, they're in the bedroom."
Jeffrey Dahmer assumes I can get away with anything. I can't be caught in my universe. The cops are like, this place reeks. And they look and see a series of Polaroids that he had pinned up like it was from his vacation of a bunch of posed, nude, decapitated bodies. The cops just looks around, he gets his walkie-talkie, and he's like, I need some backup.
Dahmer knows there's no talking his way out of things this time.
Finally, Dahmer is arrested. He says to the police, "For what I did, I should be dead."
As officers file into the one-bedroom apartment, no amount of training can prepare them for the chamber of terror they discover.
They found severed lips in the apartment. They found detached penises in jars. Obviously, they found numerous skulls. They found numerous bones. They found brain matter. They found a full human head. The amount of murder memorabilia that was crammed into this small Milwaukee apartment, it is just unreal to think about.
Especially for those living right next door.
I could see that it was a lot of activity going on in his apartment. And one of the officers told us that we have to evacuate our apartment. And I immediately asked the officer if Jeff was okay. And he responded, yeah, that fucker is okay. And that's when he started to tell me about the activity inside apartment 213. I was more shocked than anything. And then it went from shock to embarrassment because we were duped. When you think that you know someone and then you come find out that you really don't.
And the bags and the barrels of human flesh and all of the instruments that Dahmer had used to dismember corpses, it was just coming out in droves. Like, you couldn't even imagine that someone could commit this act in such a tiny place, and then all of this unbelievably graphic, gory stuff.
News quickly spreads that a serial killer cannibal has been caught in Milwaukee.
Inside a second-floor apartment, police found a grisly scene.
After about maybe a half hour, watching them through the glass, taking out the boxes, the smell was leaving as well. And by that morning, they had gotten out all of the boxes and the smell was totally gone.
The next day, police questioned Jeffrey Dahmer, knowing he's the only person who can explain the horrors inside his home.
Dahmer started talking right away. He was fully cooperative with the police, gave full confession.
Even though police only discover various parts of 11 different victims inside his apartment, Dahmer confesses to murdering 17 men and boys, dating back to 1978, when he killed his first victim, Stephen Hicks, in Bath, Ohio.
You can imagine the parents whose children had disappeared. The first family, the slaying in Ohio, that family waited 13 years. Where is our son? For those families, if you try to add up the pain that's involved, it's enormous.
After the names came out, the police at the time asked me to look at some pictures, and there was one picture, it was definitely Eddie. And I found out it was Jeffrey Dahmer when they showed his face and said his name. He killed Eddie. He really did kill him. Oh my God, I introduced him. You know, I lost it from there. You know, I blame myself. For a long time I did, but I finally realized it wasn't my fault. Who would have known? What brings a human being to do something like this to somebody else?
For Dahmer's defense attorneys, this is a clear case of insanity. And in January 1992, that's exactly how they encourage him to plead, as Jeffrey Dahmer goes to trial for 15 counts of first-degree murder.
When the defendant enters a plea of insanity, there are two phases to the trial. The first trial is, was the crime committed? Did he commit the murder? The second phase, was he insane when he did it?
Proving the first is easy, especially since Dahmer left so many witnesses behind.
Like he was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was gonna eat my heart up.
Hearing from people who had been victimized by Jeffrey Dahmer was horrible. The details were unbearable.
But proving that Dahmer was insane is not as simple.
If you can commit an organized and premeditated crime, knowing what you're doing, you're not insane. And that is what Jeffrey continued to do time and time again with each of his murders.
He was so impaired as he went along this killing spree that he could not stop. He was a runaway train on a track of madness.
But the prosecution doesn't buy it.
Dahmer told him the time that he killed each of these 15 victims, he appreciated that it was wrong to kill the victim. Your life, your life, your life for my sexual satisfaction.
He's fooled a lot of people. Please, don't let this murderous killer fool you.
When I finally got to interview Jeffrey, he told me that if he was on the outside, he would have kept killing. Nothing would have stopped him. Do I think Jeffrey Dahmer was sane? Well, not by your or my definition of sanity, but the court found him to be sane.
After a 2-week trial, Dahmer is found guilty. He's convicted of 15 counts of murder and sentenced to 15 consecutive terms of life imprisonment.
The sorrow and anger of the victims' families was heartbreaking.
You took my mother's oldest grandchild from her, and for that I can never forgive you. I hope you can deal with what you've done.
You are el diablo, el puro diablo que estaba suelto en las calles de nosotros. That means the devil, the pure devil that walked our streets and was loose.
Pain that you caused my family. That was my baby boy that you took away from me.
My mother gave 5 beautiful kids. We lost. He destroyed the baby of the family.
Why? Why would it be my son?
The last family that got up was a young woman, and she lost control of herself.
Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker! I hate you! Death is out of control! Don't fuck with me, Jeffrey. I kill you. God damn it, look at me, motherfucker! I kill you! What's your name?
He didn't react at all.
How could you blame them for being angry by what this monster did?
But the story of Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't end with his prison sentence. 2 years later, in November 1994, the most depraved serial killer cannibal in American history is beaten to death by a fellow inmate.
He was smashed over the head with a barbell, and that's how he died. And interestingly enough, that's how he killed his first victim. So maybe his death was just revenge.
But even in death, Jeffrey Dahmer still haunts our collective psyche.
Not only did Jeffrey Dahmer kill 17 people, he ate some of those people. He is a necrophile. This man committed the worst crimes that a human being can commit.
The whole idea of cannibalism is something that is so grotesque that people can't wrap their head around it. People are fascinated by things that they can't quite seem to understand.
Jeffrey Dahmer viewed us as a series of body parts just walking around. We were not people to him. We are just meat.